are not recording.
Oh shit.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, I looked up and I was like,
I got the audio from the GoPro, so I guess I'll do that again. We just missed about 3 minutes of podcast. New podcast problems, right? So for those of you tuning in, maybe this is your first time listening to me. I'm Matt Huss. I just started Eastwind Fishing Podcast to kind of spread the conservation word, tell cool fishing stories, really meet new people and spread my network. Because to be successful, as an aspiring captain or whoever you meet, you have to have kind of a story behind you, a message. My message is conservation. The gentleman sitting across the table, I believe his message is conservation too, in the best way. So today I got David Sikorski with me, the president of CCA Maryland, correct?
executive director.
Executive director, gotcha.
Yeah.
So I guess we'll try this again. If you could kind of give me your background on CCA.
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to tell a little bit of my personal connection to CCA because, like you, I can see, you're a passionate outdoorsman. You wouldn't have this platform, and if you weren't. And I think so many people in the sportsman community that love to fish and hunt carry that passion with us. It's not something new to our community. It's something that really the beginning of conservation is born out of people like Teddy Roosevelt, who we all know about, of course, because he was such a driving force behind a lot of that work initially. But it's that ethic, it's that ethos that we carry with us as sportsmen. And it always made sense to me growing up. I grew up in Ellicott City, always loved to fish, have family from my past that fished for multiple generations, just like many families.
Are you still in Ellicott City?
No, I live in Baltimore now.
Gotcha.
So, but growing up there, I'd fish in local ponds and lakes and streams, and as I matured and got older and got mobile, I'd fish a lot of other places. Had a beach house down in Ocean Pines when I was a kid. My father had a building business that I ultimately ended up working for after college. So he and I have been hunting and fishing buddies my whole life. Started on the hunting side probably about 12 and had done a lot of that. I've loved being up in this part of the world because I'm a decoy carver.
Yeah.
So this Upper Bay area is important to me. I know the heritage up here. And,
have you been in the museum up in Northeast?
Yeah, so I used to compete there during the waterfowl show in early, I think, May, first week of May. So I've won ribbons at the show, competing right there, out there on the flats right in front of the museum.
That answers my question. Why is there the decoy museum's in what, Havre de Grace?
Havre de Grace, yeah.
That answers my question. Why is there a decoy museum for David Sikorski?
Right.
Yeah, I'm not a huge hunter, but yeah.
Gotcha. Well, it's a big part of my life, and I've seen a lot of overlap, not only in the community that I now work in, with a lot of the organizations we work with, just in the way that folks kind of lead with the conservation goals in mind. And if you don't participate in hunting and fishing, you may not relate to that and understand what makes us tick as people that go out there and kind of pursue these animals. I think on some levels it's a kind of a primal urge type thing to put food on our plates, but it's much more than that. So fishing wise, just grew up trying to catch anything I could in any way I could, and had some opportunities to fish offshore a little bit as a younger kid. Really liked that, even though I got seasick. But just remember, seagrass mats with mahis darting in and out of them, and being able to catch fish like that as a younger kid. There's a picture of me. I think I'm 9 with a dock full of little flip flop sized mahi, from on the Talbot Street Pier. So really, all that stuff just was a major part of my life growing up and hunting and fishing with my dad and working with him, and being part of a small business. You get a little bit of flexibility. I'm just recently married. So up until this point, no kids, not married, just recently had a son. So I had a lot of freedom in my life, and being self-employed, I took a lot of time to be outdoors. And I started paying attention to the policy work or policy topics that came up in the fisheries world. Politics to some people is kind of a dirty word. It's not to me. It never has been. And I urge people to get involved with stuff because it's just a matter of setting policy, And so naturally, I kind of came into CCA from that angle. I found CCA in... finished college in 2004, so soon after that is where
Did you go looking for it, or did it find you?
Well,
and that's kind of a weird question.
No, I didn't really go looking for it necessarily. I found it through a couple different events, which I now know is a very common way for people to find CCA.
Yeah,
it could be a fishing tournament, it could be maybe a seminar, a chapter meeting, something along those lines. I can't remember my exact meeting. My first experience with CCA as a volunteer or a new member. But I remember living in Ellicott City, my first chapter was the Kent Narrows chapter. So I know I was involved with an event called Tie Fest, learning how to tie flies and get more involved in saltwater fly fishing because that was something I was interested in and trying to learn. So that was definitely a big driver. Previous director was a really avid fly fisherman and still is. And so that was a big part of kind of me getting introduced to a whole network of people. Like you were talking about earlier, networks are important. So I started seeing these people around me and I'm going, these people are kind of like mind. And then when I started paying attention to the policy side of things, I went, I think this organization's doing right. And we've always tried to focus on what's best for the fish first, realizing that fishing is an activity of harvesting these fish.
Yeah.
Or potentially, causing them their death, mortality, maybe.
Yeah.
Even if you don't harvest it. So you realize that fishing's a blood sport in many ways, no matter what. And it's hard to avoid that. But in general, you want to try and make sure that what we're doing is at a sustainable level and not just the way that sustainable is used as a buzzword, meaning we actually do right by the resource. That made sense to me. And I kind of quickly went up through the ranks in CCA on the government relations side just by showing up and being respectful and learning from great people that came in front of me or before me that are, many are still engaged with CCA. And then as I started to see and pay attention to the organization around the country, because we have chapters from here all the way down to Texas where CCA was founded.
Countrywide or worldwide?
Country. Yeah, nationwide. Okay. And we're the nation's largest coastal water tidal recreational fishing organization. So mostly tidal water. And that's because that's where we focus. It's we're a coastal lifestyle, we're a coastal organization. But we were founded nationally in Houston in 1977.
Okay.
And so a small group of people were at a tackle shop talking about the state of affairs and how things were going. It still happens today. A lot of people are doing it with two thumbs on Facebook, but
unfortunately,
we still do have some sort of social interaction even these days. But anyway, so folks were hanging around, talking about the sad state of affairs with speckled trout and redfish. So
I was going to say it must have been redfish.
Yeah,
that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, and that kind of maybe was the initial spark of what ended up becoming the redfish wars, and lots of things that led to redfish and speckled trout being a game fish. And that really just spread throughout the Gulf because it was necessary. Anchored gill nets in shallow inshore waters just don't make any sense, especially as our populations change and grow and our ecosystems are impacted, and we as anglers expect something out of our resource, high abundance of fish. There's trade-offs, and it's a long story. It's a complex story of back and forth and all that kind of stuff. And but ultimately, CCA's always tried to look out for what's best of the resource. Take each issue at the time and analyze it at that point and move forward. And a lot of people say we're anti-commercial fishing and that kind of stuff, and I disagree. I'm not. I love seafood. I eat it all the time.
Yeah.
I think what we really focus on is the responsibility of our government to manage this public trust resource.
Yeah, it's a finite source.
Yeah.
So, and I know we're going to get into it further, but I know just talking about commercial fishing, that was another question of mine to you.
Yeah.
Are you enemies or friends with these people? And
no.
You're friends with these people.
Yeah.
You're looking out for the livelihood and the longevity of the species.
Yep.
Do you have more on CCA there? Or?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot more to talk about, but I mean, ultimately for the story for us, CCA Maryland just celebrated our 25th anniversary last year.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So just like a small group of people in Texas started what became CCA, it was initially called the Gulf Coast Conservation Association, or the GCCA.
Yeah.
I think about 1983 it turned into CCA as Florida was added. I was born in 1982. So it's great to kind of think about it that way, about all the great work that's been done in my life. But anyway, so we've grown up the coast, and in Maryland we started in 1995. So any state could start a state chapter. We're somewhat like a franchise. We all operate under a set of guidelines and bylaws and such.
It's not a non-profit organization.
Yep. Gotcha. This 501c3. So we're a grassroots organization, and actually here in Maryland, because I'm a paid employee, I'm a full-time employee, and I do lobby to the legislature and the executive branch. I'm actually registered as a grassroots lobbyist.
Okay.
That was kind of an interesting kind of turn of events when I first got hired, and I was informed that I had to do this now, and I went, huh.
What do I do?
And it's kind of neat. You get a little badge. You skip the line in the legislature, but really, as a 501c3, we're not spending a lot of time doing that. There's rules around that, and we really don't spend a lot of time doing it. We look to our members and folks to be involved in the fisheries management process, which fisheries management process is frustrating. It's complicated. It's divvying up a resource to people.
It's very political.
Yeah, and literally by the definition of politics, it's managing something that belongs to many, basically, and trying to set the policies around how do we use that. So, in a public trust resource, we are entrusting the government to manage this resource. CCA was originally founded to create a voice for the anglers and the resource. We continue to do that to this day. And I think in many ways, one of the luckiest guys in the world to be able to talk about fishing every day and
hell yeah,
and carry something, you have a passion for it. And I rarely get to fish. I will admit I did stop at a few little spots along the way to check out what's going on. I saw some herring in one spot. I saw anglers lined up the Susquehanna River.
Yeah, there's some runs going on right now.
Yeah, there's some runs going out. And so I got to check it out today a little bit more than I have recently. But I'm definitely blessed to work at CCA and do this work. And really we have advocacy is what I've been talking about mostly, making sure that voice is there and advocating for an outcome that we want. Really that's closely aligned with educating, and dialogue is a key to politics. Being successful in politics is having dialogue, having respect, and having conversations with folks. I urge folks always ask questions, be respectful, don't assume anything. Yeah. I mean, the very simple concepts that work in all life to be successful exist in fisheries policy. Fisheries policy, I think, is unique in that there is a public process, and it's open to anybody if they want to do the work. As a volunteer, that's what drove me. I went, wait, I can show up at a meeting and speak into the microphone and talk to these people and share what I think and represent people. This is really cool. It really kind of motivated me.
Yeah.
And at an interesting meeting, it was actually during one of the government shutdowns when real politics was really going crazy back and forth down in D.C. I'll never forget, I was at a Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council meeting, which is the interstate body managed by Department of Commerce, NOAA, National Marine Fisheries. They manage from New York to North Carolina, federal waters, 300 to 200 miles. So I attended this meeting, and there were no staff there because the government was shut down.
Yeah.
Right? And we were talking about river herring, and I testified and trying to conserve them and limit their mortality out in the ocean. And I was out in the hallway afterwards, and a guy walked up to me.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah.
I've talked to a couple captains about that and done a little bit of research on the herring. And by the ocean, you mean Omega, correct?
Well, not in this case. So Omega is the company that operates the Menhaden fishery in Chesapeake, and also they have, I think they still have a branch in Texas. I think they're based in Houston as a company, but that's the Menhaden fishery. That's a purse seine gear, so they circle the bait they're targeting, cinch the bottom, bring it up alongside the boat, and they in their situation they bring the boat the fish into the hull, take them back to their processing facility that reduces them down to a fish meal, a fish oil product. Yeah. And then there's similar gear, purse seines used for bait as well, catching bait for you may use surf fishing or junking in the river. So Menhaden, that we call them LY in Maryland.
Yeah.
And
I get them all mixed up because there's so many.
All right, I'll explain that. I'll explain that, and that'll get us back to river herring. And I may not get this exactly right, but I think I had the general categories connected, and I won't get the biological kind of ladder accurate either because I don't have a background in that. I mean, my education's mechanical engineering, but so I have a science and kind of I can logically manage these things, but I'm not a biologist. Yeah. There's tons of great biologists out there doing the good work to manage our fisheries, but basically, the river herring, which are alewife and then blueback, they're here right now. They're spawning. They come up and down the East Coast and spawn in all these rivers. There's also the shad, hickory shad, American shad, which are closely related.
Yeah, we went over that in the podcast from yesterday.
Great.
The Scott Adams that I fished with.
Yeah,
we were talking about. He's out shad fishing right now. You probably saw him out there over the dam.
Nice.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So there's those fish, but what they do when they're not here, they grow up in the system as a juvenile fish, and I don't know that we actually know that much about them. In general, fisheries management relies on two different things. It's a fishery independent survey or dependent survey. So these are structured surveys to capture information from the fishery. A dependent survey would be one connected to a fishery, the act of fishing. An independent one might be using similar gear or a similar setup, but it's really just for the science component of it. It's really not connected to maybe commercial fishing. So anyway, ultimately the action we were talking about at the Mid-Atlantic Council was putting a cap on the amount of harvest of river herring at sea that could occur based on bycatch and I think the mackerel, squid, butterfish fishery. which is a massive midwater trawl. Pulling a big cone through the water to capture these fish, and it was just mind blowing all the different information they were sharing about micro salinities out in the ocean and all these different things they're finding out about where fish will hang out.
Yeah,
because for us, we see them in the spring when they come up the river, and you might catch a couple, throw them back.
And that's all
that's
think
it,
about,
right? You don't think about them anymore.
But when it comes to these big bait companies and guys dragging, I mean, what do you call those seines? Giant seines, pretty much.
Yeah.
From what I understand, and this is just grassroots logic.
Yeah.
If you're out there getting the bait, if I'm out there fishing for stripers or reds or anything, I find bait balls and I cast the bait balls and there's fish under them.
Yep.
So I assume the bycatch from these bait boats and fish oil boats is, they contribute to decimating the population for no good reason, because I'm sure these fish, just like all the other bycatch for commercial fishing, they might be wasted. I mean, I'm once again, and I admit this all the time, I'm ignorant to the situation and the rules.
Yeah.
I would imagine they don't, revive these reds and stripers on the side of the boat like they should.
Right. And it comes down to, well, so let me just finish the initial thought about the council, then I'll get back to bycatch. Gotcha. So at that meeting, I'll never forget, a gentleman came up to me named John Williamson, who had been involved in the industry for a long time, been involved in the management process for a long time. And this is probably 8 years ago, maybe longer now. And he said, "What the heck are you doing here?" Because at the time, about 30-ish, 31. And he goes, you just stand out. You don't see a younger recreational angler show up at one of these meetings.
Yeah.
And it just happened to be that I had another reason to go there, and I think I actually shad fished on the way home. But ultimately, he introduced me to an education program called the Marine Resource Education Program. It's something he and some partners in the fishing world, fisheries management world, kind of came together and said, you know what, we're marching to Washington to try and get some funding and help educate the people that this process affects. So I've been really lucky that I was still a volunteer in CCA when I first took that course. And while taking it, I said, this would be great if it was more accessible to more rec anglers. And we were talking about rec fisheries issues, not commercial. For me, it was cool, but maybe people wouldn't dedicate the time if it's off topic. And ultimately, I've been able to stay involved with that group. And prior to COVID, it was the last time I traveled prior to the pandemic, was to bring anglers together from all different walks of life and all different parts of the fishery to learn about the actual process from the fishermen. Our tagline for the program is "For fishermen by fishermen," and that's absolutely true across the board.
Yeah.
That education program is managed through the Gulf of Maine Research Institute. And next week, we're going to start doing webinars to train people that have already been in the process already, to help them understand how to engage in the process. So to me, take the story full circle, CCA is such an important part of the puzzle in creating a voice for recreational anglers, but it really is incumbent upon us and ourselves to get involved and step up and be educated to bring reasonable thought and practical solutions to the table, because then that you're actually achieving something. It's very easy to stick in social media, kind of stick in these bubbles of people that, attaboy, you're right, I agree with you. You're really not advancing things, I think, if you do that. And I think the most progress is made when people kind of reach out and try and work with others. We talked about commercial fishermen. I think I have a number of people I consider good friends that are commercial fishermen. I have good friends that are recreational fishermen. I have enemies that are both, right? So it's never that black and white, right?
Yeah.
And there's no question, I think misinformation continues to fuel divide in this country in so many ways. Some people pretend it's new. It's not new.
Yeah.
I think it's lazy to be that so binary with everything. And so I think I urge people to take a deep breath and get involved, try and deliver the facts in a way that your audience understands them.
Yeah.
It might feel good for you to say it a certain way, but if your audience doesn't hear it that way, you're not doing a good job of advocating on behalf of yourself.
If you're the one holding all the information, it's responsible to it's responsible to make sure that you're doing that. You're delivering it to the right people. I have employees. I talk to every single employee a different way, because it's like being a teacher.
Yeah.
Every kid or every student learns differently.
Yeah.
So that's good to hear that you guys recognize that.
Yeah, and you have to be so respectful to each other. Gosh, I can't tell you how much I've learned from so many people that have been engaged in this arena for so long. And I was just talking to one on the way up here, and just little things that you learn from those that came in front of you. will help you be successful.
Yeah.
And I'm not sitting here going, I know everything. I failed daily. I learn that I should take different approaches to things. And I just try and, shoot for the moon and land amongst the stars. And I think that makes you successful in this stuff.
Failure breeds success.
Yeah.
And that's it's something to live by.
Yeah. Yeah. And so to menhaden, the most important fish in the sea. There's a very long history with this fishery, of course, and there used to be reduction fisheries up and down the Atlantic coast.
Can you define reduction fishery?
Yeah, so that's where you catch the fish to reduce them.
Okay.
Reduce them into a meal or oil product. People think about the omega-3 oils that you eat. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of information out there about potential benefit. There's information about no benefit. And it all depends on how you ingest it and how your body really is meant to absorb these things. I can tell you that I've found that as far as the value to your diet in eating wild game or fish, it makes sense to eat it in the most natural and fresh setting possible. That's where your body's still really trained to benefit, right? Yeah. We know that all these other things we're doing to things we eat in our bodies is not good, and we're continue to find out that stuff, right?
Chicken breast is healthier than a McChicken nugget. Right?
Yes, absolutely. Especially a chicken breast that they maybe grew up in your backyard eating, browsing, right?
Yeah.
But obviously there's this massive nation and world to feed. And so we live on land, have an impact on the land. The land runs into the water, impacts the ability of the watershed to produce protein. In fact, I think tonight there's a UMC's University of Maryland presentation on kind of like the history of almost ruining the protein factory that is the Chesapeake Bay.
It's April 7th, by the way. This isn't getting released.
Yeah, okay.
Probably
there you go, April
Tuesday.
7th. So, yeah. So the whole theme of that is about reducing the protein factory that is the Chesapeake. Yeah. And I've been fortunate enough to, again, in my role at CCA, we have a habitat program. We do, we work with students and other folks to build reef balls, artificial reefs. And so I get to talk to students about the basic systems that are at play out here, out in the bay, and why every little piece of the puzzle matters. And so we have this, back to where I was, we have this increasing population on land, which impacts the water because of runoff. We have a need to eat. We have a perception that what we're doing is probably not wrong, unless it's really proven to us in our face. It's kind of, I think, human nature.
Yeah.
Hence why politics is difficult. I think it's natural to defend yourself, right? So no fisherman ever feels like they have a negative impact. And then when there's a long-standing history of a certain type of harvest or a certain activity, we just intuitively say, okay, well, it hasn't really caused a problem yet. And you can almost say that the advocate for conservation or the advocate for something different is like Chicken Little. The sky is falling, the sky is falling, the sky is falling. Well, no, it hasn't fallen yet.
Yeah.
Well, the ceiling's gradually getting lower, or the sky is gradually getting lower, right?
Yeah.
And that's the harsh reality that people need to accept. And so I think a big part in the Chesapeake, it's never as simple as one topic. In fisheries all the time, I hear people say, oh, no, it's not the wreck, it's the commercial. Oh, no, it's not the commercial, it's this.
That battle's going to go on forever.
Exactly.
You're never going to stop that.
It's the system. It's a system. It's like, I think back to my engineering classes and think of these like 2-page, calculations we would do that I couldn't even probably put pencil to paper on today. But I think about how complex these systems are that we were trying to understand or model in our engineering courses. That's what fisheries managers and scientists are trying to do with the stuff out there, while we're absolutely impacting it with every rain event, every weather pattern that goes out of whack. So much in the management system is based on averages. So much on the management system is kind of based on faith and actually understanding what happened after it happened, and then going, oh, now what do we do to adjust? And to the bycatch point, so much is based on trust in volunteer data or information. Many fisheries have observers on board to understand exactly what's happening on board, but it's a very small percentage.
By observers, do you mean scientists collecting data, marine biologists collecting data?
Yeah, they're usually they work either as a contractor for the government or in some way connected to the management system. Yeah. Quite often the industry pays for it as a good faith measure to show that their fishery is clean. There's lots of great people in the commercial industry that are constantly working to make a clean fishery, but we also can't ignore that there's a trade-off there. It's like we have all these people, how do you feed them? And then the impact that it has on us that might want to use that resource for our own use, personal, and whether it's for consumption or not, we have a desire to use it. Our desire is wildly different than the commercial incentive to go and activity and volume, and all those things, right? So they're really difficult to compare on the same scale when it comes to even managing them.
Yeah.
So in these purse seine fisheries, where again in the case of Omega in the Chesapeake Bay, there's a cap of 51,000 metric tons on menhaden harvest annually. 2 seasons ago, they actually just ignored that cap. And
I read about that. I heard about that on one of your podcasts.
Yeah.
How does that happen?
Yeah, it's
Is it? I guess the fine was worth the.
Yeah, they wanted to roll the political dice, if you will, and it came all the way to Secretary of Commerce at the time, Wilbur Ross. I got a phone call one day from Houston, and it said, "David, we can't make it to DC next week. You gotta get a haircut, put on a suit, and you're going in with the big guns or the big dogs."
Yeah.
And I get to meet with all the CEOs of a bunch of national companies that we work with Wilbur Ross, the secretary himself, to give our perspective on how important the little guy's voice is in this whole situation.
Yeah.
How important the process is, because it's so easy in a commercial fishery to look at it and say, Omega's harvesting these fish. It's backed up by the scientific management plan. It's been approved by the management bodies. In that case, of course, they blew off the rules, which was completely unacceptable.
Yeah, because there's been how many millions of dollars spent to get that research to create the rules.
Oh, yeah.
And then the rules,
Yeah, it's all public trust. So the public is entrusting the government to set rules and follow through with them.
Yeah.
And we're funding it as well. Yeah, I mean, the taxpayer is. And so nobody should get a leg up necessarily. The rules are there for all of us. And that's what happened with Omega 2 seasons ago. And so their total harvest last year was lowered. Of course, last year was a very different year for everything. But ultimately, they have that rule and hopefully will comply to it. But when you think about 51,000 metric tons, well, metric tons like 2,200 pounds, I think, and change, 2,204 maybe. So that's a lot of fish. And it's a trade-off. And so Virginia is the last remaining reduction fishery. It operates out of the Northern Neck in Reedville. And so it just makes sense if you look at a map, these big ocean-going vessels that are industrial size.
I've seen them out there.
Yeah, and they're supported by planes.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep. Seen them.
So they're supported by planes that spot the menhaden school, direct them in. These guys are talented. They know what they're doing. They're great fishermen. They have an entire community built around this company. The plant was upgraded by federal dollars to support the economy there. There's a lot of
generations of fishermen just zone this thing into us to an exact science.
Yeah, and they're doing what they're doing, just like any of us, right? And I'm not the kind of person that ever says that you're a bad guy. You wipe you off the face of the earth or something like that.
They got kids to feed.
Yeah, I have complete and utter mutual respect for anybody I might disagree with on policy.
Yeah.
And until people decide to take it, make it personal, make it wrong. But the truth of the matter is, we really don't know how much bycatch occurs. It's obvious, like what you said. We know logically, you pull up to a school of fish, there's game fish, there's bait fish.
Yeah.
And what we're talking about is the trophic level. And so in science or energy transfer, you have these animals that, like a menhaden, graze on plankton, phytoplankton, that is a lower level of on the trophic layer. And so what they're doing is transferring all the sun's energy that goes into growing these phytoplankton and algae and stuff that they graze on, turning it into this highly compact protein, which is why they're so valuable for human use or feeding to livestock or pets or other things that the fish meal is used for. Every year it's different where it goes and who buys it and what they're doing with it. Right now, the company that owns Omega is Cook Seafood, which is one of the world's largest aquaculture companies, Canadian owned.
Yeah.
So what we're really doing is allowing this company to reduce this product, export it to feed probably Canadian farmed salmon, which bring about a whole other ecological challenge, and then we import it back into the U.S. at a much higher price. So we're kind of cutting ourselves off twice, like from a trade deficit perspective.
Yeah.
We're undermining ourselves twice, selling high yield, low value product out, buying back that really valuable protein to feed ourselves because we can't figure out how to do it otherwise.
Yeah.
And again, it comes back to feeding people. It's complicated, right? So in the end, there is bycatch. There is a certain percentage that is assumed to occur within the gear type. Like most studies that say, this is what we think, it probably could use to be updated a lot more.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot to be said for transparency in fisheries, because if you're transparent in the way you operate your fishery, then you limit the criticism and we all just kind of go on our merry way, right?
Yeah.
The second you start trying to hide things and not share and not be public and transparent, when people assume that you're hiding something.
It's a whole new can of worms at that point.
Yeah.
No
and
pun intended.
Yeah, I mean, and agencies do this all the time. That's why there's the critic of the government will always stand. And it's kind of the angle I've come at a lot of these issues with. It's like if you just took a little more time to try and build consensus and communicate with your people you're managing, your stakeholders that you technically work for, we'd probably all be better off. And that's because I know how I want to be treated and how I think the members I represent should be treated.
Yeah.
With respect. No different than the controversy over striped bass on the flats and shutting down catch and release and all that stuff. That was just disrespectful.
So I want to get into that.
Yeah, that whole thing went down.
Considering it's my backyard.
Yeah, it was utterly disrespectful. And same thing as with bycatch. There's a great video. I might have to find it for you to put in your comments or something of what's happening in the Gulf right now. Here we have. You would think it takes quite a while to get off to the shelf out of Ocean City. 50 some miles to the closest point, really. But our state waters go out 3 miles. In the Gulf, they go out 9, I think. And it might even be different in each state.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is our great friends at CCA Louisiana right now are involved in a similar battle with Omega or Cook Seafood. There's a second purse seine fishery down there owned by a South African company. So we have 2 international companies taking our domestic protein.
10 miles offshore.
Or even closer, right up against the beach. I'm going to send you a video of purse seines operating in shallow water. Where you want to talk about a bycatch problem, this is it. Videos of massive red drum laying their belly up, killed by this gear, because no, they're not releasing them. Their priority is to get their gears set up to harvest menhaden, pogies, bunker, whatever you want to call them. Not alewife. They are not alewife. That was my original point. They're not LY either. LY is, I think, a derivation of alewife, which is what Marylanders call bunker, and that's perfectly fine. I'm not saying anything's wrong with it, but they're not an alewife herring. So in Louisiana, there's definitely some pictures. There's definitely some battles brewing. I know our leadership in Louisiana has put out a good faith effort to talk with the other side, the commercial fishery and leadership that, excuse me, leadership there in the state. And if I'm not mistaken, just last week, in the first part of April, I did hear that there can't really find a handshake agreement necessarily at this point to try and push these purse seine boats offshore a little bit. The same problems kind of has been brewing in the Chesapeake for quite some time. I was saying earlier, these ocean-going industrial boats coming out of Reedville, you look at them, you'd think, get out in the ocean and fish. Catch all your fish out there. There's plenty of menhaden in the ocean.
Yeah.
The impacts here in the estuary that we're all concerned about. And you'd think it just go do that, but guess what? Fuel costs a lot of money. Time, labor, all those things. So they're going to catch what they can close to home.
Yeah.
Same story in the Gulf, and these battles will continue to happen because there's a worthy policy question there. Is this sustainable? Is it acceptable? In the Gulf, the bycatch stuff is right there in your face. These are weighted purse seine nets. So they're basically just creating a little circle around the bait school, cinching it up and dragging along the bottom, and you're finding definitely big redfish, trout up here. I've personally caught, last time I was fishing down towards the bridge tunnel, 2 summers ago, I was fishing with Captain Tyler Nahn from up here.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, right in Cecil County.
Yeah. Yeah, so we were catching cobia. And
one of my favorites to catch.
Yeah, and we had greasy, calm, flat day. Gorgeous. They forecasted it. It happened. We ran all over. We ended up catching some fish. And I'll never forget, he was teasing one in for me. I ended up hooking it on a 10-weight fly rod. And I looked up, and there's pelicans crashing on menhaden. And the fish I had hooked actually was one of 5 that were riding right above a menhaden school, kind of like right next to it. As we teased it, brought him off the school, I hooked him on a fly. Well, the Omega boat was operating probably about a mile away.
Yeah.
Flat calm.
That's where I've seen the boats is down there, cobia fishing, red fishing, and it sickens me.
Yeah.
The fact, I've seen these giant schools of redfish, and the bait's right in front of them. So, it breaks my heart to know that, because I talk about on most of my podcasts, it seems like the redfish have been managed very well. And I don't know what that is, or if
we can talk about that.
If it's something we can learn on.
Yeah.
And Scott Adams from last night said I think we kind of took a page out of Florida's book, with the gill nets, and they banned gill nets, and they completely rebounded from that. But you probably have way more accurate knowledge than I do on why the reds are still plentiful.
Yeah, so we can talk about reds, and then maybe that's a good segue to rockfish, because there's a lot of great comparisons there, and I think lessons learned. The redfish wars, which I mentioned, again, I don't know every little detail, but essentially there's
started in Texas, correct?
Yeah, in the Gulf. In the Gulf. And so they're, of course, in their juvenile stage, they're a inshore fish.
Puppy drum.
Yeah, puppy drum, channel bass. They're called a lot of different things. So they're an inshore fish. Once the gill nets were taken away, that solved a lot of the problems of impacting the juveniles in a commercial fishery. And then you were catching the big ones. And I can't remember how they went ahead and executed the redfish fishery. I wouldn't be surprised if you told me it was a purse seine, like similar to the Menhaden. There are purse seine tuna fisheries. Anytime you get a schooling fish like that, and we all know big redfish school.
Yeah.
I think there might have been purse seines out in the big water. But ultimately, that was all banned, commercial take of these fish. And it's not as simple, like the timeline and stuff. We have some great leadership. I love listening to tell these stories, and I'm not them. So
yeah.
We might have to get them involved at some point to tell these stories on the record. But ultimately, it kind of just went up the coast. And the idea is that you're protecting the big fish, except for very limited take. There's very limited take in some of the Gulf states. Like in Texas, you can buy a trophy tag. I think the same thing is the case in Louisiana. In most of those states, there's a really good relationship between groups like CCA and Texas Parks and Wildlife and the other agencies for state water management. They have a really good relationship, especially because it's easier.
Yeah.
It's rec and the managers. There's not that commercial component making it even more complicated politically. So there's a good relationship there. They monitor the stocks really well. They do a really good job of. They have some hatcheries that were invested in at the right times. Because just like right now, Texas has gone through this freeze, and it's going to impact their inshore species quite a bit.
Yeah.
But immediately, their conservation organizations and agencies are out there surveying, understanding the impact, and trying to give access to anglers and bridge that gap between what's good for the resource and what's good for the fishermen, and balance it, right? So it's a cooperation thing. So, but ultimately, there are hatchery-supported efforts in the Gulf. Those are important. They're dealing with various environmental problems as well.
Yeah. Are redfish migratory? Like stripers are, where they're traveling like hundreds of miles on coastlines, or
yeah. So you'll get them
start in Florida or the Gulf.
So it's a different. I mean, the redfish population exists all the way down into Mexico. I can't remember the genetic differences and where the hard lines typically are, but generally speaking, in a lot of these fisheries, there are genetic differences depending where they are.
Yeah,
they're all the same fish. I mean, they can interbreed, but the genetics are definitely different, and they're consistent in certain areas. So you're not getting a littoral migration like up and down the coast.
Yeah,
you're getting more of a deep to shallow or estuary down into the coastal waters, and then depending on it's a time of year thing. It's a little bit different up here, like what our fish do versus what the Texas fish do. I don't know so much about all the biology of it all, but ultimately the management decision that was made was you can catch these juveniles in a relatively narrow slot. You're fishing on like 2 to 3 year classes generally, I think, in these slots, maybe 4. Redfish grow a little bit faster than a striper in the first couple of years, and then just like a striper, once they get old, they grow slow. And you could find and like sample different fish from different areas, and they're all gonna be a little bit different, just like us,
Yeah.
But ultimately, those stocks are kind of compartmentalized, and I think ours mix with the North Carolina fish. Same thing with speckled trout, and our big fish winter offshore. There's I think there used to be a long line survey to try and get at some of the abundance estimates and stuff through the management system off like the North Carolina coast. And there's a major biological or ecological barrier at Cape Hatteras. So with a lot of fish, you see that be kind of the boundary between where they exist and where they don't.
Yeah,
it's where the Labrador Current meets the Gulf Stream, right? So you have these kind of two different situations. But ultimately, I think redfish, the story is a great one because we do have these big fish which people want to catch. It's great. The catch and release fishery form's amazing. I know you and Brad were talking about them before, and you've caught some. That's perfect for a recreational fisher.
Yeah, an unreal fight followed by a nice clean release.
Yeah,
I mean, that is the catch and release fish that's the top of my list.
Yeah,
when I'm catching them, I don't even think about rockfish.
Well, and there's one on the wall, that big old paddle tail.
Yeah,
those things. I mean, they're just pure strength.
Yeah,
and personally, I think that this management system makes sense for them. In my opinion, it makes sense to harvest the smaller fish that are more quickly replaceable. They're going to grow faster. They're hopefully more replaceable at that point.
Yeah.
Plus, there's this dynamic in just life in general that we understand that life's a finite thing. If you plotted a cohort, or meaning how many fish are born in a year, the most that's ever going to be in that cohort, in that age class, that year, is the moment they're born.
Yeah.
They're immediately dying, being eaten by things. Fish are born, fish die, fish come to an area and leave an area. That's it, if you want to simplify it.
Yep.
Right? So managers are trying to figure out what's going on there. So if you're looking at population dynamics, again, there's the most possible at year 0, the moment they're born. They're going to be very abundant with like a redfish or rockfish when they're age 3 to 4, right about that 18, 19, 20-inch range, right?
Yeah.
So, of course, you're going to see a lot of these fish. Definitely rockfish because we're in the breeding ground.
Which is, would that be considered almost like a false reading? Because if you see in all these puppy drums, you're thinking,
yeah,
well, if all these puppy drums are here, then all these bulls are here. You know?
Yeah. Well, and so what we try and get at, and actually we mentioned this in our guidance on Amendment 7, the current rockfish action, we talk about what's called a stock-recruit relationship. And so, yes, an angler always sees what they see and can see to the horizon, and then I think in our brains we kind of replicate, this could be happening elsewhere.
Yeah.
We can communicate and understand that it is happening elsewhere if we talk to people, right? But a fisheries biologist needs to understand the whole picture. And so often that includes the gaps. Like finding out there's no fish somewhere is an important thing for a manager, right? For a fisherman, it's a failed day.
Yeah.
So we don't actually go out looking to fail. We go out to try and find fish, so no wonder we're going to think there's fish if we are successful.
Yeah.
And so there's a different bias there, and that's not a bad thing. It's just you have to understand that. Same thing with fisheries managers. If a fisherman all day long looks at what a fisheries manager does and says, hey, dummy, they're over here. Like, yeah, but that's not the point necessarily. Yeah. And it's never that easy.
Well, that's, we were talking about that. I know you didn't see last night's podcast because I haven't released it yet, but, we talked to, I'm not pointing out just commercial, but you go on Facebook and guys are going, the fishery is no different for me. If you go out on the bay right now, on any given day, and I'm just using head boats as a, I guess kind of a guide, they used to be spread out everywhere. You could find these huge biomasses of fish wherever you went.
Yeah.
These boats, I mean, I know you've seen it when you go out. These boats are getting closer and closer to the point where they're almost running into each other.
Yeah.
Because that's where they have to be to catch the fish.
Yeah, when guys from the mid-bay have to move their boats up here to the upper bay, or not quite this far north, but to find the fish, to me it's an obvious canary in the coal mine, a signal that something's going bad.
Yeah.
CCA for a decade has been saying, hey, we see the fishery retracting. And the reality is some managers and some stakeholders wanted that.
Yeah.
There's the whole, they're eating all their crabs concept. This idea that, yes, and a predator is going to eat available prey. But the point is we should be able to try and find some balance. And those dominant year classes are definitely like a consistent signal fishermen, I urge fishermen to start paying attention to, and really kind of educate yourself on what you're interacting with, because not only can you make more of an ethical decision, like don't go catch a bunch of undersized fish and just keep catching and releasing them.
Yeah.
Like I get it if you want to put a bend in a kid's rod, but every kid I've met is happy with 3 or 4 fish. Now go home.
Yeah.
Pull off.
Also follow the science too. I mean, there's a lot more context to put behind that statement as far as water temperatures. Educating yourself on the studies that have been done on water temperatures. I was talking to Scott last night, and he told me to ask you about this, see if you remembered it. And this is all news to me. I'm fairly new in the fishing community.
Yeah.
I've been fishing for years, but the last 3 years is where my obsession and sickness for fishing started.
I can relate.
But up here in the flats, he was telling me, I just moved here 3 years ago. And I'm still very new to this particular fishery.
Yeah.
I guess back, in the late 90s, early 2000s, there were studies where they were penning in these fish. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on that? Because that's super interesting to me.
Sure. Yeah. So we talked about this a little bit on the first What's on the Line podcast, part 2, I think, which our podcast has been an adventure on too many other things to do. Not very consistent. But anyway, Rudy Lukakovic is the DNR scientist that led that work. That was at a point where the fishery was growing.
Yeah.
And stakeholders were saying, hey, I want to catch some fish. I was actually just talking to
Can I stop you 1 second?
Yeah.
What year range are we looking
late
at?
90s.
Late 90s, okay.
Yeah. And so 95 was the year we said it was rebuilt. There's a couple different versions of history, just like always, but I was just talking to somebody about how Maryland came about harvesting the smaller fish. And it was ultimately through coast-wide approval, because there's always been an Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, or more recently.
Yeah.
To oversee this fishery. So Maryland's always doing things that are checked by the whole coast. And that's never perfect, but it is what it is. But ultimately there was kind of this fisheries growing. I've heard the story where anglers said, "Hey, we want to enjoy this fishery," because during the moratorium, you could go out fishing and catch rockfish and release them. So
it was catch and release during the moratorium?
Yeah, and it worked, right? Imagine that.
Yeah.
No surprise. If you release a fish, it lives, or most likely will live.
Yeah.
And if you educate yourself to avoid the conditions which cause post-release mortality, then technically it's the most renewable resource you've ever seen.
Yeah.
Look at largemouth bass world.
Yeah. See, I was unaware of that. So I guess there was still commercial, or as far as commercial, recreational fishing for head boats, they were still going out. They were still catching fish.
It changed, and that's where I've seen different stories. And I was a kid. I don't remember. I caught my first rockfish post-moratorium.
Yeah.
So I don't remember all those details. But ultimately, the story is that the flat situation is a great story of the agency realizing that the stakeholders had an interest in doing something, and they opened it in the right way. They didn't. To me, the burden of proof was correct. It was, hey, we want to do this, utilize this resource in a certain way. Along with that comes all sorts of great benefit, culturally, economically. People have access to these fish.
Yeah.
So DNR said, all right, we're going to do a study. We're going to figure out what kind of hook and release mortality exists under these conditions. There was some science that showed, mostly in freshwater conditions, what happens. And catch and release is a no-no in freshwater stripers. They're just not going to make it.
And this is freshwater where I'm at.
Yep.
Yeah.
And your salinity is going to vary depending year to year.
Recently, it's been 0 almost.
Yeah. Well, and I couldn't believe driving along the river coming up. It looked lower than I expected it to be.
Yeah.
I don't spend enough time outside anymore to pay attention.
It depends on the dam flow up here.
Yeah,
I mean, there's so many rivers just in this particular area of the flats. That's what's so wild and interesting about it, and makes it hard to fish.
Yep.
Because there's so many variables that are constantly throwing you off with water temperatures and everything.
Yeah. So these fish live in the ocean, right? So we were talking about redfish growing up quickly and then maturing and growing slowly. Striped bass are very similar. Females grow a little bit faster than males. We know that from observing it. So some would say, there's in the stock assessment for striped bass, there's an understanding or an assumption about what % of a year class are sexually mature. So therefore, they're in the spawning stock at a certain point. Yeah. So some will mature earlier than others is the takeaway. But all are mature by, let's say, year 8. And so once they're a mature fish, once they get above a certain size, they're 99% chance they're a female. I think the threshold there is about 34 inches. There are big males. There are small females, but the majority.
Most of the cows you catch they're females.
Yeah, and you don't know. It's really hard to identify unless they're in a spawning condition, whether it's male or female, unless, again, they're in spawning condition.
Yeah.
Or they're so big they must be a female.
So back to the pens.
Yeah, so to the pens. What we were saying was we wanted to catch these fish, and so the agency said, all right, we're going to do a scientific study to better understand the impact you're going to have. Scientist Rudy Lukakovic led it up, worked with recreational fishermen, MSSA, CCA members, probably commercial fishermen as well, and put these fish in pens to observe what happens to them after release.
And there were guys fishing these pens, I guess.
There were catching the fish on light tackle, artificial, placing them in the pens.
Releasing them.
Yeah. So the pen looked a lot like a pound net. It was a seine net that they couldn't swim through with poles, anchoring it in place. Yeah. And these fish were observed for, I think, up to 48 hours, then released.
Were they feeding the fish in the pens?
I don't think so. And Rudy does talk about it on my one podcast, and actually I've got some great audio that will never be shared about the real story, some of the real stories behind the scenes. But ultimately, that's what they did. They observed what happened, and they found that low salinity is definitely an issue, but as long as it's low temperature, things are good. Yeah. If a fish is shallow,
62 is what
I can't remember the exact numbers.
That's what we were trying to figure out last night, because we were talking about the regulations, how they changed over the years, and they've kind of changed to not make sense. It used to be, because last year we had a very warm year. I was able to have 2 good weeks at the end of March, 2 great weeks at the end of March. Yeah. And today's standards for rock fishing out here in the flats. Yeah. And this year I had 4 days, and I was out there every day, and I know where they're at. Yeah. So, but he was saying, it used to be a moving target. There was an understanding between the anglers and DNR, whoever. Yep. And it was when the water temperature got to,
I think it was 65.
Yeah. When we saw 62 or 65, it shut down.
Yep.
And that's something I can
or a date certain. It was like May 1st, May 5th, May 6th.
Correct.
Like
yeah. It was one or the other.
Yeah.
But definitely there was a cutoff line. Yeah. And that's something I can absolutely get behind, because you give you give us our fishing back, and we're in the agreement of, hey, this. Let's follow the science here.
Yeah.
That's a word that goes around a lot these days, is science, and I'm all for the science.
Yeah, yeah.
So
it's a whole other word that its definition has changed drastically. People throw it around like you wouldn't believe. I try not to use it because anyway. But
our definition of science, we're trying to follow that.
And it's using the data and the understanding you have to maximize the access to the fishery, but also take away access when we know we have an impact.
Yeah.
And there's some that say that when the flats fishery opened, that was the grand political bargaining chip that the charter boats wanted in order to open a trophy season. And then the trophy season...
They wanted to do a trophy season up here?
Well, just the trophy season that used to be, which was always south of a certain line.
Yeah.
There's been no fishing in the spawning reaches, which are really from kind of the lower end of the flats down towards like Pools Island area.
Yeah.
So that's a big spawning concentration area. So ultimately, supposedly, when the flats opened, that's when the trophy season came about as an option. Wildly popular. Of course, everybody wants to catch a massive fish, but we're intercepting these fish on the way to spawn. We're impacting these fish in a much different way when you're trolling and dragging them through the water, catching them on that heavy gear.
Yeah.
You're impacting them. The bottom line with the flat study was shallow hooking, and that flat study was actually later followed up by a bait-based study that used circle hooks versus J hooks, and fish, as long as you're shallow hook, meaning it's in the mouth and visible, then that's a shallow hook fish. They're going to live, 99% chance, especially when there's some salinity and it's not that hot. The deeper hook fish that have a puncture somewhere, that fish is likely to die. Yeah. And the scientists could only do so much to understand exactly what that hook may have punctured, what's happening there. But ultimately, we know that a deep hooked fish is likely to die.
Yeah.
There's some things that fishermen should do, like maybe cut the line and release that fish if they can't legally retain it.
Let it deteriorate.
Yeah. Learn to avoid fishing in a way that will do that to a fish is key. That's the ethical side of things.
What's your take on bait fishing?
It's a way to fish.
Yeah.
I'm not against anything.
Yeah.
I think there's a way to shape management so that we can all have access.
Yeah.
I think it's hard, and that's why it's not always the outcome that most people would see. And this most recent exercise that Maryland DNR has gone through with stakeholders for Addendum 6, the last change in striped bass, was an exercise of that. I mean, we called out the process issues or lack of process, lack of transparency time and time again. And it just continued. It's not over yet.
Yeah.
There's still debate about the summertime closure and all these kinds of things. And ultimately, our statement on this was do what's right, reduce all harvesters by the same amount, the 18% that's required. And even that 18% might not be enough. It might not work. But do that. Do it across the board.
So by the 18%, and once again, I'm admitting, I do this about 10 times a podcast, ignorance to the facts here.
Hey, the vast majority of people that fish have no idea anything I'm talking about.
Yeah,
so,
I get it. Give me credit for wanting to learn.
I get it, man.
Yeah. So the 18%, I guess I'm going to explain this in my ignorant way, and maybe you can correct me. So 18, they took the numbers and they said we need to cut down 18% of what we're doing now to restore the fishery. Was there a target date to that we needed to hit this number by?
Yeah, so it's what they think. I guess one way to describe it is you're driving your car at a certain speed, and you have the option to let go of your gas to slow down. You have the option to hit a brake, come to a complete stop.
Yeah.
You're changing your acceleration, right? And so think of fishing mortality, which is the only thing a fishing manager can control as rate of speed. So it's kind of an instantaneous rate of removal based on our understanding of what's happening 365 days a year.
Yeah.
And so that's ultimately what they control. And they know that in the recreational fishery, they control it based on number of days allowed, the bag limit, how many fish you can keep, and then the length of those fish. And so they try and understand that to derive a fishing mortality rate based on what they understand about our effort and our activity. And then on the commercial side, they break it down to pounds and a quota. And it's never that simple, but...
That seems hard to track.
It's the basic
the pounds, but
concept.
I guess there's only so many ways to track it, though.
There is. And there are tags. There are plenty of things that have been done wrong over the decades. And the reason why the system is so, on paper, accountable is because of all the wrongdoing that used to occur.
Yeah.
There's no question about it. You don't need rules unless people continually break them to the harm of others or the harm of something that's publicly shared.
Yeah.
Right? And ultimately, that's why we ended up where we are. We've even divvied up the striped bass commercial resource into individual shares. There's a lot of complexity with that. It's not worked very well in mixed fisheries around the world, around the country. Mixed fisheries meaning we have a recreational user, you have the commercial user. So you're kind of like privatizing a portion of that stock into that individual's business that they get for private gain, which has another public value to it as well. I mean, you're feeding people, you're deriving economic benefit. So it's just a very different exercise, like I've said a couple times. So ultimately...
So how was this 18% broken down?
Yeah. I'm like a rabbit. I run in a big circle and I eventually come back.
I'm the same
Yeah.
way.
Yeah. I'm actually getting back to where I start a little bit today.
Oh, I see. That's the problem with me. I never get back to where I started. I get ideas and I'm like, I can't forget this.
No. So the 18% was basically, they said, look, we got new numbers from the survey called MRIP, which is the Understanding of Recreational Catch and Effort, when they went, all right, we recalibrated this system with a different methodology, and now we understand the stock of fish to be much bigger than we thought by number, by overall population. And that's because the new surveys showed that recreational anglers were interacting with more fish than they thought were even in existence prior.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like they make this assumption of it's like your catch per unit effort is one way to look at it. And it's ultimately, if you see this many fish out there, then the population must be this much plus a certain amount. And therefore, we're trying to enact a certain amount of fishing mortality. And fishing mortality is actually applied across an assumption of the population. So they take year 1 or year 0, the year they're born, all the way through. I can't remember how far they go out for stripers. But there's something called a waterfowl table in the stock assessment, which is like a 700-some page document. But I urge people to dig through it and just read the heading of the chart. Because what that one shows is an assumption about the actual number of fish born based on surveys. And it's year to year to year. It's up and down because they're not successful at spawning every year in a major way. And we track that. It's, again, another thing. It's not perfect, but we track it, and it's consistent.
Last year's numbers were bad, weren't they?
Yeah, and they've been bad on average for about the last decade. We've had a few spikes that, frankly, I don't think actually came through the system the way we thought they would. Yeah. Or when they did, they were exploited too much.
Like 16 or 17, there was a spike in a good way, wasn't there?
Yeah, I think it was a really good spawn in 11 and 15, so you would have seen those fish as they turn 3 kind of coming through.
Just because you have one good year, though, that's almost like a false reading to the point where everyone gets excited and then starts reverting back to the harmful patterns.
Yeah, and so what you want from a recreational fishery is consistent spawns and a diverse mix of fish. You want enough big ones where you don't even have to mess with the little ones, because you shouldn't really be catching and messing with the real small ones, right? Yeah. You want to try and shape all these things and kind of make it overlap in the right way. So the 18% component was, okay, our fishing mortality is too high, and our spawning stock biomass, which is how we measure the health of the stock, it's mature females, has fallen well below where we thought it would be. And so the 18% was saying, okay, if we reduce harvest removals in across the board, whether they be from commercial catch, commercial dead discards, recreational catch and take it home, or recreational dead discards, it doesn't matter. We want to reduce coast-wide 18%. And so that's easier said than done, as all states start to analyze their data and kind of go to battle to see who can bring home the most to their fishermen. Yeah, because that's a very real reality of fisheries management. Again, especially a system that's been built on commercial catch first and maximizing the benefit to the nation through commercial catch. That's how the system started. Yeah. So to even talk about how valuable a fish is that you release and catch multiple times is a very foreign thing to that system. And we're going through that evolution. Yeah. And we're going to go through it for a long time. It's never going to happen fast enough. So the 18% was enacted with, what were the regs? It was one fish at 19, I think. What did they do? Anyway.
It was 2 years ago, it was one fish at 19, and then, I don't know, it changes. I know there was one slot fish at 19, and then you could keep one over 30 something. I don't know. I'll find this and I'll post it. Yeah, right.
Well, it doesn't really matter. Ultimately, what they did, what in the most recent reduction, because there's been 2 in a row.
We don't keep fish, though. Who knows?
Well, and I keep them all the time. I just never go fishing. Yeah. And it's all a blur at this point. I'm like, in 2020, talk about a good way to mess up a flow of things. Wow. But ultimately, what happened this most recent time to reduce, which was the second reduction in the last many years, what I think Maryland DNR should have done. So what happens at the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, which I happen to serve on now, I'm the proxy for a legislative appointee there. So I represent the legislature, and I serve at the pleasure of this legislator. And so ultimately that board, prior to me getting on it, made a decision, deliberates, and there's a technical advisors called the technical committee. So the board says, the board's in charge, and they say, hey, 3 representatives from each state. They say, hey, technical advisors, we want you to bring us this information because of this status of the fishery. And so ultimately, after a lot of back and forth, it came back down to this 18% concept. The brand new benchmark stock assessment had come out with brand new data talking about the size of this fishery being different. And typically, when you find out the size of a fishery is different, it's not really a challenge. But it is based on somewhat controversial or very controversial recreational catch data that statistically is meant to give us an understanding of the coast-wide year-long catch, and then used by managers on a much more finite level or much lower, finer resolution, which is not what it's intended for. So when managers start doing that, they're doing that it's like a means to an end, whatever it might be. And in Maryland, what ultimately happened was we heard signals early that the commercial fishery would not be cut. And there's a lot of conversation around, well, the commercial took their cut last time, they stuck to it, they have a quota, they're accountable, they have tags. Well, many of us don't forget, not too long ago, the pictures that people took, and we still have, of tens of thousands of pounds of illegal fishing gill nets. Yeah. And all these things that used to happen. And so once something happens like that, the trust factor is slippery. It's tough to be, it's complicated, right? We know there's illegal activity going on still. I got a tip about a guy, doing something that recently, it happens all the time. My phone rings all the time. And so there's always that trust factor. And plus there's the fairness factor. We have a state law that says that we should manage our fish equitably and fairly and with these certain standards in mind, recognizing all citizens, not just those that have access to them at this point or a privilege to harvest them for profit. And all those things are kind of higher level policy questions that we can ask. When it comes down to it, yes, a commercial fisherman is feeding the public and feeding their family from that activity. When you think about a recreational angler, if you don't look at it through the lens of the massive economic value we bring, plus the cultural value we have, you can kind of discount it and say, it's just recreation.
Yeah.
I think some leaders look at it that way. They discount our value. They discount our input. They view commercial fishing just as that business because you can put a dollar amount on that landing and see that person's face that's doing it.
Yeah.
And so unfortunately, the politicians or the politically appointed people, I think, divide us on purpose. I think they did that through the Addendum 6 process.
Seems to happen a lot these days.
It does.
Division.
Yeah. And it's
the board.
It's easy. I mean, the concept of a scapegoat has been around a very long time and used by dishonest people or people that have a certain means they want to reach.
So what happened up here is from what I'm gathering, is that, not just the flats, but the flats was part of it. We were the scapegoat. We were that. We were that couple percent they needed.
Yeah.
And they cut us off.
Yeah. So they looked at all the different uses of the fish, and in the recreational fishery, we're broken into 6 different periods of the year called a wave. In Maryland, they only survey in the 5, not the first wave, but the next 5. So that means starting in March, because a wave is 2 months. There's no surveys in January and February, so we have no understanding of what recreational anglers are doing.
Yeah.
We know the fishery's closed for rockfish. Starting in March, they can analyze our catch and effort and understand a certain percentage of our mortality over a time period. Because statistics are interesting. I think a good friend said that statistics are like a lady of the night. Once you get them down, you can have your way with them. And I almost hesitate to say it like that because I don't mean it in a bad way. But it's stuck in my mind for a reason.
Yeah.
What is it? Lies, damn lies, and statistics, right?
Yeah.
But I live in the world of trying to shape statistics to change people's minds.
Yeah.
So it is what it is. And you got to play the game. So ultimately, they do look at all these little ways to cut down and try and understand, even though they're not supposed to, understand like day by day by day what our overall mortality is. And then reduce it, add up all those days to make 18. And so I serve on the...
Seems kind of backwards, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, they should have just said, let's cut 18%, and based on the needs of the fish and their biology, this is how we want to do it. They really didn't. They were looking at managing the people more so, which I get it. And it's easier for me to be a well, I wouldn't say a Monday morning quarterback because I was in the game, maybe on a different team. But ultimately, it's easy for me to sit here and say, okay, I would have done that differently. But I don't have the job of a fisheries manager that answers to the public, or a governor, or various other things. They have a tough job. I think they make it tougher on themselves sometimes by not being transparent.
Well, there's so many, and it's trust me, sitting across the table from you, I'm just trying to wrap my head around all this as well. I can only imagine, the guy at the top. This presentation is almost better done with a whiteboard.
So I have a 4 foot by 8 foot whiteboard in my office, and I jokingly tell my wife that all the time. I'm like, I literally want to carry like a sketch pad.
Yeah.
And especially because I can't explain any of these things in a simple way. It's clear, and unfortunately, I don't know anybody.
No, you're doing a great job of explaining it to me. And trust me, like I said, my big word is I'm ignorant to whatever's going on.
Well, so I mean, ultimately, what DNR could have done was just said, all right, commercial quota was this. We're going to cut it by 18. Recreational, we believe your impact was what it is, and based on the information, we're going to cut you in this way. And what we expected. What I personally expected and still want to see is managers always kind of hedging the bet on the most likely outcome, the most positive outcome for the resource. So yes, there is a value of commercial catch. There is that economic value there. But if you measure recreational economic value versus commercial, we overshadow them. But then you start talking about the cultural value and the personal value and the person, and that stuff's. It's a reality of what we have to do in this system of government, but unfortunately, we really always need to hedge our bets on what's best for the fish. So if you're going to talk about the way we found new information about the volume of fish we believe die when released. So for the first time ever, catch and release mortality was the largest portion of removals, estimated removals. We really don't know. We use a 9% multiplier across the entire fishery coastwide year long. We assume 9% die. Catch 100 fish, 91% live. So, 100% of the fish you kill die.
Correct.
Right?
I say that all the time.
There's no conservation value in cutting catch and release. You're not. It's like betting on the riskiest stock there is because
you're saying. Do you agree with that, or
what? Cutting catch and release?
There's no conservation value to
the stopping catch and release fishing?
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
Yeah. No.
I'm on the same page.
None. No, nothing measurable.
Yeah.
And that's the key.
And that 9% to me is confusing and angering sometimes because there's no context behind it to the general public.
There's no context behind so much.
Unless you talk to David Sikorski or somebody in one of these CCA organizations or.
Sorry, I'm moving. All right. Squeaky chair.
You're good.
40-year-old hips.
Yeah. But yeah, there's not a whole lot of context behind these numbers, and it's like, are we accounting the catch and release in July?
Yeah.
And which I'm sure that 9% is probably 40% of that 9% or 60%.
Yeah, and it's I can't remember some of the conversations I had with some pretty high officials in state government, but trying to talk about the statistics and the percentages and stuff, it was like, oh my gosh, I feel really bad for my math teacher.
Yeah.
Because it should be simple.
Yeah.
And if you take a percent of something, it's fair. If you have a lot and I take 18% from you, that number is going to be bigger than if I have a little bit and you take 18%.
Yeah.
But I still gave up 18% of what I had, and so do you.
Yeah.
And overall, combined, we've given up 18% of the whole. It's not that complicated.
This is where the whiteboard comes in play.
Well, and it's not that complicated. And if I was better at math off the top of my head, we'd do the math together.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it's that simple, and that seemed to kind of fall on deaf ears. There was no interest to reduce the commercial catch. There was no interest to even reduce the commercial catch a little bit. And so the scapegoat became the month of April. We can't impact these fish, we need them to spawn. But in the next sentence, you hear fisheries managers talk about, we don't have a stock-recruit relationship. So we can't guarantee that a lot of spawning fish equal a lot of baby fish.
Yeah.
That depends on the environment more than anything else. Plus, since like 1995, I think, it might have been 1990, every river in the Chesapeake, in Maryland's portion, is closed to targeting. We're protecting them where they spawn. We're protecting them where they stage the spawn. So this whole idea that we're impacting pregnant fish is what one manager said. They're not pregnant. Their eggs are actually fertilized outside their body. You know, he used another word which is very conflict driven in reproductive stuff. You know, like
that's funny.
And it's sad because
sad way.
It's sad because here you are as a passionate advocate on behalf of people that you know are really frustrated by the system, don't trust it, but are paying for it.
Yeah.
We literally pay for it. I just renewed my fishing license today. That money supports the agency that works for us. When you buy anything, tackle on the wall behind me.
Watch out, there's exposed hooks back there.
10%. Ooh. I have ADD, watch out. I'll start playing with shiny things. 10% excise tax on fishing tackle. Boating fuel, boating purchases. Just because of 2020, there will be $600,000 more dollars coming to Maryland DNR to be spent on behalf of recreational fishing and boating because of COVID and people going out and fishing and hunting more, or fishing and boating.
Yeah.
So
you can't find kayaks or boats anymore.
Yeah.
Everyone's got them now.
Yeah, and all those activities pay an excise tax to support the system. That goes right back to the concept of conservation, you know, begun with people like Teddy Roosevelt.
Yeah.
We support the system. Most outdoor recreational users that are not hunters and fishers or boaters don't pay in that way, except for like entry fees to state parks. So you'd think that those who manage us, those whose salaries we pay, would be really, really transparent and respectful and kind of provide really good dialogue for all of us. And through this process in Striped Bass, they didn't.
Yeah.
They kept us divided. They worked with everybody. They came up with this idea that the charter captains could have a 2-fish limit if they used a reporting system, but everybody else couldn't. You know, they create the us versus them. The commercial gets left out. And in the end, it undermines our trust in the system. It undermines the data and the system that's been consistent for many years in Maryland. You know, the balance.
Yeah.
It was always an agreed upon balance of about, it was like 42.5 commercial and the rest rec. Recreational is for hire and private. We always had that balance. Well, that balance went away when the privatized quota system came out. It went away with some management changes at the ASMFC. They used to separate the bay from the coast in a different way, kind of scientifically. And so all that went away, but the spirit was still there to keep balance. So now we found out that what was 60-40 by the new numbers is about 80-20.
Yeah.
So now what it does is it makes the recreational the target to say, oh, you're big and bad and impact the fish. Commercial counts all their catch, so therefore they're not bad. It erases all the history and reality of lying, cheating, stealing, people that have gone to federal prison for stealing rockfish.
Yeah.
You know, poachers are poachers. They don't belong out there accessing the resource. And there's plenty of recreational poachers.
Yeah.
But it's sad that even poaching turns into like, oh, well, recreational people do it too. Like the what about syndrome that we all have. It's ridiculous.
That's little kid stuff right there.
Yeah, it's ridiculous, right? Grown adults do it.
Yeah.
And I do it. I mean, I hear politically appointed people talking to me like that every day.
Yeah.
Down to the point where they, even to this day, literally today, you hear conversations about what group said what, so why a public official takes the action they take.
Yeah.
Oh, well, they said they don't like it, so that's why. It's like, stand on your own 2 feet and tell us about why you made your decision as an individual, as a leader.
Yeah.
That's what you get paid the big bucks for, you know? And so it is complicated, but I always focus on building bridges, working with people, educating people to understand the impact that we have, because we do, and understanding how to get involved in the process and try and do it respectfully. We do a lot of stuff in the legislature as well. We're not very proactive in the legislature. There's this whole, I shouldn't even say this. It's kind of like letting out the secret. It's almost flattering sometimes to hear about all the things we quote unquote do. Mm-hmm. We've never done, or the things we say we've never said. And I know some dear friends who I highly respect have always said, Dave, if you're getting flack, you're over the target. It's a famous Chuck Yeager quote. Yeah. And that's the reality of the work we do. We're trying to keep an eye out on things. We're trying to lead with facts and science. We try and provide a respectful understanding of the recreational angler perspective, especially the conservation-minded one. People say that we're against killing fish, we're against trolling, we're against this, we're against that. I'm not. And if anybody else is, well, I feel bad for them.
If anything, from what I'm taking from this, you're not really against a whole lot, but you're for the fish.
Yeah.
And really, you know, that the people's questions are answered themselves. If it's bad for the fish, then you're probably against it.
Yep. And if there's a question we need to answer, I want to answer it.
Yeah.
I mean, we invest in science throughout this country at CCA. Habitat's a whole other thing that is just, when it comes down to it, you can squabble over who gets to catch which fish, but you're really at the end of the reality of everything. Like, again, fisheries managers only have the ability to control fisheries, fishing mortality. That's the very end. It's everything else leading up to the abundant fishery that we should really be focused on.
Yeah.
Are we holding our public officials accountable for what's happening with this dam? What's happening upstream of this dam?
That's a whole different story.
Right. And are we holding...
That dam could ruin the bay and...
I live in Baltimore City. We have a split sewer system, or whatever it's called, where, if it rains, the sewer comes out. I live directly above the Jones Falls River.
Yeah.
And it's disgusting. And that's just a failure of our public, that trust we put in government to manage things for all of us is failing all over the place and continually does. And I continue to remind people, even with these things in our pockets and all the distractions on them, the more and more you get distracted by this, the more and more somebody's making decisions on your behalf. Mm-hmm. So get involved. Realize it's going to be tough, but guess what? The outcome's tough anyway.
Yeah.
Not a single angler like sitting on the banks right now and not going and pursuing, the fish of a lifetime.
Yeah.
We should give access to those massive fish just like we do the redfish. I think a policy of letting them go makes a lot of sense. You're going to hear the people from the New England states always criticize the Chesapeake if we kill fish before they're accessible to them. Well, what about the big ones they're killing?
Yeah.
And that's the what about battle that's always going to exist. But the more and more we can bring science to bear, respect and understanding that we all should have access to this resource, the better off we'll be. When management fails, when managers can't sort out a problem for the needs of the stakeholder, but more importantly, the needs of the resource, that's when things start getting banned.
Yeah.
That's what's happened down south. They failed repeatedly. And that's why there's not gillnet fisheries. Yeah. Because they couldn't figure out how to manage it. So the trade-off became, this is how we'll use that resource.
Yeah.
So.
I know you probably get asked this question all the time. On a scale from 1 to 10, how close are we to the M word?
Well, some people
10 being the M word and 1 being we're back to where we need to be.
Yeah, I mean, some people think we're there. Some people think we've been there for a while. Personally, I don't think we're there. Organizationally, we don't think we're there from a CCA perspective. And really, it's not that it wouldn't solve some problems. There's no question.
Yeah.
I don't think it's possible at this point, politically. And that doesn't mean I'm not willing to take the challenge, right? We've have a history of, and I have gray hair and falling out hair and the scars from all the different battles over the years that have been tough battles, right?
Yeah.
But I just don't think we're there yet because I think we still have the tools. I think we're a couple good spawns away from the fishery coming back, but I think we've leaned on that possibility for way too long.
Yeah, and once it gets back up, I mean, is the goal, once we get back to our target numbers, then put on regulations and not play Chicken Little,
You would think that...
It seems like people get excited, or not people, but the organizations get excited, population's back, no regulations, go for it. And then we just continually, it's a cycle. Rome falls over and over.
You're right. And it's, I think the reality is we need more accurate data. You can make really good decisions with no data.
Yeah.
If you really have your fingers on the pulse of what's happening, you really kind of get lucky and work hard.
Yeah.
In the political system that we have, in the management system we have, managers need data to back up, to back things up.
Yeah.
There's very few high-level politicians like a governor or something like that wants their fisheries department causing a bunch of headaches. So they have a job to do to manage the expectations of the resource, or of the people. That sometimes comes first, ahead of the resource, which is an unfortunate situation.
Yeah.
I believe that honesty, dialogue, and transparency and educating the stakeholders gets us all to where we need to be.
Yeah.
And we've got a long road to get there. And I think only once we're there can we actually have a reasonable dialogue with level heads about what's best for the resource and how should we utilize it. Because we're at a major pivot point in the striped bass history. We've waited too long to reduce fishing mortality. That's actually what attracted me to CCA in the beginning, of the logical and measured approach we took to trying to guide management previously. I've gone back and read a lot of those letters, and it almost leads you to an "I told you so" moment sometimes. And I don't say that
in a bad way.
yeah. I don't say that like, "Ha, I told you." Like,
Yeah.
I'm not being boastful. It's sad.
Yeah.
It's sad. And the reality is, we only know what we know in our own little world and our own little perspective. And so it's a tough arena. And my message to everybody is get involved, get educated, participate.
Yeah.
Also try and hold each other accountable to respect, to mutual respect. There's so many things we do to each other in our own little community that's just ridiculous. I mean, I've been dealing with some different comments on social media by some people, and it doesn't bother me. I just feel like it's a missed opportunity sometimes. We have a lot to learn from each other.
Yeah.
That's one of the biggest reasons I'm so lucky to be in the seat I'm in. I learn so much every day from people that have been doing it a long time. And if we don't capture the knowledge of people that have been through the past and understand that there's a future ahead, there's a bright future if we do it right.
Yeah.
If we forget that history, we're gonna, what is it? They say if you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it.
Correct.
Yeah, that's the harsh reality. So I always tell people, look in the mirror, ask yourself that, hold yourself accountable, and I also tell people, hold me accountable. So again, it doesn't bother me when people criticize our positions, our association, me personally. It really doesn't bother me. It actually sparks to an opportunity to learn. If you feel a certain way about me or what I've done at CCA or what we've done, I'd rather talk to you about it first to see if the information you're operating with is even true.
Yeah.
Quite often I find out that the story you heard is not true.
Which is true for me. You know, I've formed opinions, and I'm once again ignorant to what CCA did, to what DNR's involvement is, to what your involvement is.
Yeah.
It's today's been enlightening for me.
Yeah.
It kind of makes me feel better, because I love this fish here. I love the gifts that the Chesapeake Bay has to offer us, and for the most part, I was assuming it's doomed.
No.
But it seems like there's some hope here, and
there is. I wanted to talk a little bit about where we are because of Amendment 7.
Yeah.
It's all about shaping the fishery for what we want it to be. And this time around, managers sticking to the guardrails that were set last time. That I'm not going to say that the previous management efforts, ultimately what happened with the most recent stock assessment is we got that brand new perspective.
Yeah.
Brand new perspective of what the reality of the stock assessment says.
Who does these assessments? Is it CCA, DNR?
No. It's a partnership. So DNR as a state agency is part of the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, an interstate compact. So all the states agree, are supported financially by the federal government and the states, and people like me and professional fishery managers. So you get a legislative appointee, a governor's appointee, and then generally the fisheries director or an authority from the agency. So you get two executive branch and one legislative branch representative. Every state does it from Maine to North Carolina in the case of stripers.
I should have paid attention to government class.
Well, yeah, we sit on a board together, and so it's really it's an exercise in states' rights and states working together. There is a federal component, and so there are science centers throughout the nation that NOAA manages, and the Southeast Science Center does this striped bass stock assessment, and it might change year to year, but it's available on the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission website, the ASMFC, that's .org. There's like Fisheries Management 101, and there's the plan, and it's kind of lofty stuff that'll wear you out and put you to bed, but it's all peer reviewed, which is a key part of science. You know, they really have to go through a rigorous process, and the scientists that do this work do their best to stay out of the politics of it. I mean, I think there's politics in everything. There's healthy debate, which occurs in the science world. There's a kind of rightfully so, there's a disconnect from academia and the science world from like true politics. And you, depending on the issue and your perspective, you could, agree to disagree on whether or not science is not politicized.
Yeah.
Politicians are good at politicizing everything, in a bad way.
Yeah.
But ultimately those assessments are done by really, really rigorous processes, but they're only as good as the data that goes into them. And they're only a guess.
Yeah.
I mean, you're counting something you can't see that moves, and it's that.
There's a lot of variables that go into that.
Yeah.
It's a moving target, quite literally.
Yeah, it really is. And the bottom line is, you would think that the agencies and stuff would act with balance and just simply focus on the resource. I think their mission says that.
Yeah.
They don't. There's always other powers that be, and so the spirit of CCA was roll your sleeves up, get organized, support the organization. We have local chapters throughout the state that do fundraisers. They kind of ebb and flow depending on the avid volunteers that are involved.
I guess that was my next question. Sorry to cut you off there.
Yeah.
Someone like me, what's step one to get involved with this?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, we have our national office in Houston. Mm-hmm. We are essentially a franchise, so we operate under the same umbrella. You could go to our website, which is ccamd.org. /join
Yeah.
is to become a member, or joincca.org is our national website.
Okay. Does this cost money? Is it free?
Yeah, so the membership's $35.
Okay.
It's very similar to like Ducks Unlimited, Trout Unlimited, that kind of membership. We have a great magazine called Tide Magazine.
Okay.
Should have brought you a couple copies. And ultimately, members get that. Prior to the pandemic, there were 6 issues per year. I think there's going to be 4 this year.
Okay.
Maybe 5. But that's produced out of our national office. This most recent episode or issue, we have a really cool article about our reef building program. But ultimately, you get that magazine for the $35 a year.
Yeah.
That money also supports our national efforts to oversee regional fisheries issues and federal fisheries issues.
Yeah.
So we retain lobbyists in D.C. and have a great network of a coalition. There's a great organization that is directly connected to CCA in culture and in work ethic, and is run by a former executive director, a guy named Jeff Angers. Used to run CCA Louisiana. He now runs the Center for Sportfish Policy. It's a really cool spot, or place to check out. I think it's sportfishingpolicy.org, I believe.
Okay.
But the Center for Sportfish Policy is kind of like our national hub of all our groups that work together.
Yeah.
And mostly on federal fisheries policy. So you get all that for your $35 is my point.
Well, if anything, it's going to a good cause. It's someone like me per se. I'm not looking for what am I getting out of it other than how can I help?
Yep.
And how can I get involved? I've been looking over the CCA Maryland website over the past couple of days, and I was looking into the tagging program. Is that something that comes with the membership? Or
Yep.
you have to sign up for that and take? It looks like you had to take a tagging class, correct?
Yeah, the tagging program's changed a little bit, and we're working on a kind of version 2.0. We work with a partner organization, the American Littoral Society. They're based in New Jersey. They do a lot of great work, and their tagging program is going through some changes. But we connected to them. Anybody can be a partner of theirs, or I'm sorry, a member of theirs as well. And I think they have a $40 fee to be a member.
Yeah.
So what we worked out is we're considered a club. And so I pay an annual fee on behalf of CCA. CCA's dollars pay that organizationally. And so our members qualify to tag through ALS because of the membership.
Yeah.
So that's a perk in some ways. There is a tagging class because that was largely put together prior to COVID. We've done a couple of virtual trainings. And the key is that it's a citizen science effort. And the last thing we need is people
keeping fish out on the deck too long. That's the first thing I thought. I said, I hope there's a
stabbing
class
them,
for this.
Stabbing them in the eyeball.
Yeah, you hit a fish's spine, it's not going to swim very well.
Right. Well, and so I mentioned that education program I'm part of. I can't tell you how many dissections of fish I've seen as part of that.
Yeah.
And just completely nerded out all over all that stuff. Plus, I love to cook. I love to break down fish.
Yeah.
So, like, I have to remember that a lot of people may not understand and visualize, like, the structure of a fish.
Yeah.
This class is really important. So it was at the request of a former fisheries director of Maryland DNR. He said, it'd be a good idea if we did a training. And I said, yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
So we plan to bring it back virtually. We have a really, really cool map. Being a duck hunter, Ducks Unlimited magazine's always had like where a bird was banded and then where somebody shot it.
Yeah. A
similar kind of thing, a tag. So I always like that.
Well, that's what I was wondering if there was some kind of tracking, because that's really interesting to me.
Yeah.
There's some kind of I remember watching it back in the day. There was some kind of website where they tag these great whites.
Yep.
And you can log on and see where these great whites are in their process, which is really cool.
Major Lee was the famous one that kept finning and showing herself everywhere.
Correct.
Yeah, and that stuff, I think it's so important to connect to new audiences. That's one of my the most productive time I spend is figuring out how to better convey what we're doing, why, and the details of how people get engaged to a diverse audience. And unfortunately, all the political battles take away from that. But it is what it is. So with tagging, to me, it's just like I nerd out about it. I was fishing with some guys. It was in February last year. I bumped into some friends up in this neck of the woods, and I said, "Hey guys, I happen to have these tags with me. I'm not going to fish anymore this spring. Will you tag a couple big fish for me?" And these are big fish catchers.
Yeah.
And they tagged a couple. One of them came back as a 46-incher caught up here. Later that in the year, it was harvested in Narragansett Bay, Rhode Island. So they got to know what happened to that fish, and it was kind of bittersweet because it was a big old cow and she got killed. But knowing that is so important, though, and that can help shape management. So we have a really cool citizen science program, kind of done in the same vein right now and supported by Yamaha. So Yamaha Outboards has a Right Waters program.
I have a Yamaha.
There you go.
Behind that.
I sold my Yamaha, my boat.
I just got a brand new boat, man. Brand new.
Great motor choice. Great motor choice. I have a Yamaha generator right now, so
there you go.
Makes me happy.
Yamaha keyboard.
There you go. Yes. Yeah, a huge part of their portfolio. I always say I wish I would have kept up with piano lessons as a kid. I like dashboard piano, you know. But so Yamaha is supporting a citizen science program called the Invasive Species Count. The Great Chesapeake Invasives Count is what it's called. If you go to ccamd.org/count, if you're out catching snakeheads, blue cats, flatheads, you log your catch starting last week, April 1st, all the way through October 31st. It's free. If you're a CCA member, you get, so it's free, and at the end of each month, I'll do a live drawing on our Facebook page and YouTube channel. We're asking for people to donate product. $25 is what we're looking for a prize.
Yeah.
Just later this week, I'll announce our, in fact, by the time this airs, probably, I'll announce our first partner that's donated an item. And our goal is to have 10 prizes to give away the last day of each month for that 7-month period. What we're doing is asking people to use the iAngler tournament app. That's developed by the Angler Action Foundation. Same, like, really pro-conservation and getting anglers involved in science kind of organization. That's just fantastic. They're based in Florida. They kind of helped me get this idea here and said, all right, let's try and understand what people are catching in the invasive species realm. They're a lot of fun to pursue. They taste great. Some people want to release them. It is what it is. You can't mandate that somebody kills something, but we can mandate that they don't spread them. Unfortunately, they have been spread. And Yamaha wants to make sure that, we have a bright future for our waterways, and we know not to spread invasive species. They have such an impact.
Yeah.
Invasive and non-native is a different thing. It's a non-native species is not necessarily invasive, but snakeheads, blue cats, and flatheads are considered invasive. They are considered to have an impact on their local ecosystem.
Yeah, the blue cats have blown up the last couple of years.
They really have.
Like in a bad way.
Yeah, 2018 is where they really spread out through that freshwater period.
Yeah.
Snakeheads, I mean, we're finding out more and more about them. They're impacting the Blackwater system much more than anybody thought they could. The Potomac seemed to not.
A lot of, just to elaborate on it, the Blackwater system, from what I understand, there's a lot of juvenile rockfish that come out of that system.
Bingo.
Correct?
So there's another driving force behind. We don't have an agenda with this. We actually ask for a location of where you caught your fish based on the water body, and a lot of people go, no. Well, guess what? I got news for you. There's no secrets in the world anymore.
Not only that fish moved.
Yeah. And, it is what it is. And I don't disparage people that don't want to share. I respect that. Yeah. I'm not going to tell you all my spots. And actually, I'm not telling you any spots because we're not conveying to anybody but Maryland DNR the data behind what you support, what you promote or provide us. So we're trying to get at the question of what are they eating.
Like you said earlier, you're kind of a fish nerd. I am too. I caught a cobia last year. The first thing I do when I'm filleting
dissect it,
cut open the stomach, see what it's eating.
Yeah,
that's good information for a fisherman to have too.
It is
matching the hatch.
I'll never forget the day we were wahoo fishing out of Beaufort or Morehead City, North Carolina, and a buddy called and was like, "I heard him. We heard him say something on the radio, like, man, I just got cut off by a wahoo," and it was like a half hour later we caught a wahoo in that same area, and later that day. We got back to the dock, we were cleaning it, and the sea witch and hook and part of the mono leader of that guy, that partner boat of ours, was in the stomach of that wahoo. And we're like, dude, we caught your wahoo. Here's your bait back. So anyway, and that's the fun part. I mean, we did the invasives count last year during the pandemic. We had great participation. We learned that a lot of the snakeheads reported were empty stomached. Makes sense. They're going to eat an artificial or a bait. They're hungry. We found out many were gravid with eggs, full of eggs. Which was amazing. I mean, they're amazing reproducers, and that's part of why they're invasive.
Yeah. Well, they protect their young.
Yeah.
Unlike most species, correct?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so there's a lot of things unknown. Going back to us and our licenses and the systems and the management system, Maryland's called America in miniature. From the mountains in the west, the ski resorts, Garrett County, Black Bears, this western type situation we have out there, very similar to the other parts of the country, down to our coast. We have brook trout, striped bass. We have white marlin as our three big, kind of marquee
within
fish.
3.5 hours of each other.
It's crazy. So you think about and then I can't remember how many, 11,000 miles of shoreline in the Chesapeake Bay? All these just massive portfolio for what on the map looks small. Then you realize how big the Chesapeake watershed is, all the way up to New York and out to West Virginia and down to the the Tidewater area. Think of the portfolio of these managers. And I was first appointed to the Sport Fisheries Advisory Commission in 2010, and that's when I first really got involved in management. And I don't think I've ever heard since that time that a budget has increased for fishing game. There's concerns about participation going down, which means special fund revenues going down. There's something new happening all the time, weather patterns changing, all these things. There's people retiring. There's other priorities that pop up. Our agencies have been dwindled down to ineffective, or it's not that they're ineffective in a way that they're still full of great people and a great mission and great work. They just don't have the tools they need financially. So the spirit of this event is for us to step up and help and report data, because there is no invasive species division in Maryland DNR. They're working hard to try and build commercial markets for blue catfish. Yeah, I've been involved in that.
Well, it's new. I mean, like you said, the blue cats are as of 2018.
Yeah.
I haven't, I'm working with a small world here. I haven't seen the snakeheads really blow up in the flats until last year.
Yeah.
So, and anything in government, like you're saying, it takes forever to get.
It moves slow. Yeah.
Yeah. So it could be years before we get that.
And I think I said it earlier, fisheries were always looking backwards to try and enact something that takes forever, and that frustrates the heck out of people that are seeing things happen, right in their faces, and then we overcomplicate it by fighting with each other, and that's not a good reaction. I should never fight with somebody who disagrees with me.
Yeah,
let's have dialogue. Let's learn. And so that's the spirit of this
reasonable
event.
discourse. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's the point of this. Exactly, reasonable discourse, and then the other thing is plausible deniability. That's government's tool.
Yeah,
always go. No, well, I think it was it was them.
Yeah,
they said to do that. Anyway. The bottom line is we're here to help, and I view this event, I built this event with great corporate support to be a big tent that we're all welcome under to participate.
It's a huge tent.
Huge.
There was a lot of information today.
Yeah. Well, and that's what the Invasives Council all about. It's what CCA is all about. We take issues as they come up. We don't have this like set in stone, we want this and we're going to fight. In fact, our tagline on our letterhead says, working to conserve, promote, and enhance Maryland's marine resources for the benefit of the general public. That's either our mission or our objective.
Yeah.
Working is the key word.
Exactly.
Working. We have some amazing volunteers that work. I mean, guys that are just so dedicated to these issues, and they don't give up. They don't ever let anything get in the way and say, you know what, I'm not going to continue on my path, because what they know what they're doing is right. They know what they want is a plausible outcome. And so the dedication of the members I get to work for is amazing. That's what we rely on financially. We have some great supporters around. I actually saw a sticker on your truck, Jones dealership up in Bel Air. Mm-hmm. They're a great supporter of our habitat program. We built reef balls at the Subaru dealership in the rain. 66 people came out to volunteer that day to build reefs.
Wow.
Yeah. And ccamd.org/habitat is a brand new page we're working on. Has a map that shows kind of the basis of our Living Reef Action Campaign, our reef ball building campaign. Mm-hmm. We have the support of the No Shoes Reef Foundation. The No Shoes Nation is Kenny Chesney.
Yeah.
He's a board member of our National Habitat Program.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, really cool. I mean, a guy that could pick any cause and do any great things, and this is what he's doing. Yeah. Supporting marine.
He's a big name.
Huge. I mean, Entertainer of the Year so many times. I can't tell you how many Kenny Chesney concerts I went to, and I don't think I could remember half the ending, but that's the point. They're fun. But it's really cool, and I'm so fortunate to have such a great network. So when people say, why CCA? Well, these are all the stories. These are all the reasons.
Yeah.
It's not we're against this. No. We want to shape a better future for our fisheries, and we want to do it based on science and based on the public, just like our mission says. There's a really cool project coming up. I can't talk about all the details yet, but we're going to be engaging with a community that's probably underserved, definitely not communicated with clearly. A growing portion of our population, the Hispanic community.
Yeah.
I'm on a focus right now, and it's a key priority of CCA, thanks to great leaders that understand what it takes to do right by our entire community. We're focused on a lot of different Hispanic outreach efforts because they're such an important part of our fishing community. And I've sat through too many meetings looking at violation reports and people talking about people of Hispanic descent that are on these lists. And I always say, well, okay, I try and understand the cause to an issue, and these are lists of like natural resource violations. Say, all right, well, why are we communicating in Spanish? Are we connecting with officers that can connect well with these folks? And are our agencies, do they look like these people and understand that they're part of our important fishing community as well?
Yeah.
And I understand all these sensitive topics because rightfully so. I mean, everybody deserves respect, and there's a lot of much larger challenges that I think we push upon each other on a local level it's not fair to anybody. If we want to talk about immigration policy, let's talk about immigration policy. Talking about fisheries, we're talking about having fun, feeding your family.
Yeah.
Sharing tips, there's nothing better. Where else but like a fishing pier can you walk down and everybody wants to look at each other's bucket and talk to each other and share rigs and share lures and pass it on, right? I mean, there's no community that should be completely blind to what divides us other than the fishing community.
There's no community that's been more receptive to just to me as a new guy, I just did a catch and release tournament, reached out to all these bait companies. Everyone was so nice. Everyone said yes. Every captain I meet is just, we become good friends.
Yep.
You seem like a great dude,
I'm a terrible fisherman though, so
I'm on podcast number 4 and I reach out to you. Yeah, man, I'm more than happy to come up and reach out to you.
Yeah.
You don't get that in most hobbies.
No.
Or lifestyles. This is more than a hobby at this point. It's sickness.
It is a lifestyle, and it's the fish connect all of us. That's why, again, we always say what's best for the fish first. I'm not here to fight a battle for somebody that wants to do a fish a certain way and gives them a leg up over somebody else.
Yeah.
That's not what we do as an organization. That's why we're successful.
Yeah.
We're not about, we only represent this group or that group. We talked about the charter boats wanting to fish for their business, and I have no problem with that. I've talked to charter captains personally time and time again about that issue, and it's not that CCA has some problem there with their clients being able to keep 2 fish, other than like what on the surface is a challenge there. I mean, you're giving something to somebody and to the other, right? The issue's not with the charter captain, with their ability to do business. I mean, there's tons of great captains. They're tremendous ambassadors to our resource, bringing so many people fishing.
Yeah.
My first rockfish was caught on a charter boat.
Yeah.
And I think people lose sight of that when we start to divide ourselves, and that's just allowing the other forces to kind of win, if you will. So, again, I'm a get along with everybody, but also hold everybody accountable, and I want people to hold me accountable.
Yeah. A
lot of words come out of my mouth, as you can tell. I have a lot to say. It's my job to talk on behalf of these resources, and I want my members and our, there's commercial fishermen up in this neck of the woods I talk to all the time.
Yeah. To
help me understand their perspective. I want people to help. We have to keep each other honest.
Yeah.
That's how we succeed with this stuff.
You have a great outlook on all this, and it's comforting to know that you're behind CCA, and I really appreciate everything you're doing.
You should see me scream into a pillow sometimes out of frustration. So this isn't an act, no doubt. This is me, no question. I'm consistent, but it's not that easy. But
like I said,
I appreciate it.
The word that came out after speaking to a lot of guys about you, or just saying, hey, I'm having David Sikorski on the podcast, is genuine, and you seem like a genuine guy, and that goes a long way as far as, like you said, the trust with politics and everything. You said you are a politician, but you seem like a guy personally.
I'm a lobbyist. I'm not a politician.
Okay, lobbyist.
We are all lobbyists, actually. I always joke around. Yeah. So in that education program, I've seen some amazing people that are effective advocates or representatives for fishing, many for commercial fishing, teach me so many things. And I'm not going to get these quotes right, so I won't try it. But basically, one guy said, there is politics in everything. And there is. It's kind of shaping policy in the public arena, let's say. And so, and there's nothing wrong with that. And we all lobby. And one thing I like to remind people is that the moment you're born and you cry, you're making an action to affect something that you need, or to try and get a reaction out of somebody, for your mother to feed you or whatever, right? That's human nature to try and get, and we're an odd critter that we kind of like organize in these family units and these little cultural groups and whatnot.
Fight for a cause.
Yeah, and we defend ourselves and we try and look for the future. Most animals aren't like that, most mammals and stuff. Yeah. So we're
probably almost none.
Well, no, and we're our own worst enemy. And so people think lobbyists and they go, oh, they're crooked, they're bad, whatever. Well, you're actually kind of undermining yourself by even thinking that.
It also depends on what you're lobbying for.
It does, and
if
we all lobby.
Murdering people, you might be a bad
person. Of course. So we're all lobbying. I mean, I just so happen to be I think we call it the white hat, the ones kind of doing right by the public.
Yeah.
So it's really not a bad thing. But anyway, I can't remember where you were going with that.
So I guess on to my next thing before we end this.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure you've had no time to think about this, which I like.
Oh man.
Yeah. Who are you calling out? Could be somebody from CCA. Could be a captain. They can decline respectfully. You know, this is how I'm trying to grow this thing. It is kind of grassroots snowball. You know, and that's the only way I feel like I can reach people.
Yeah. So I'm
one of the only ways.
You know, gosh, I'm trying to think of somebody that would be able to get up here easily, so it's easy for you.
I'll be able to do remote soon.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So keep remote as an option.
So I think I'd like to have you interview Steve Lay.
Okay. And what does Steve Lay do?
So Steve is a commercial fisherman.
Okay.
Steve works the Upper Bay. He's a crabber. He was out, I think, eel potting this morning.
Do you have the name of his boat? Just curious.
I can't remember. But Steve is one of these people that stands out to me as a great leader, somebody that I really enjoyed learning from. He is the chairman of the Tidal Fisheries Advisory Commission.
Okay.
He and I butt heads all the time. In fact, I got to catch up with him on a tough issue right now that relates to the Upper Bay.
Yeah. So he's from up this way?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. He's based out of Havre de Grace.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah. Big time crabber, sells retail. And I think people realize, again, if you view somebody as your enemy, if you will, or in any sort of negative light, you're missing an opportunity to learn from them. And watermen, more than anyone, have an innate understanding of what's happening to our bay. And so that's what frustrates me the most about people that go, oh, it's the commercial guy. And it's like, man, you just threw up a wall and created conflict where it could be a learning situation.
I'm admittedly wrong for. I've said that before, but it's, like I said, I'm willing to admit my ignorance of the situation.
Yeah.
And fighting for my cause of being the catch and release guy.
Yeah.
And that's selfish. It's ignorant, and it's not the way I want to be. I'm trying to learn.
Yeah. Well, we all have to do that. I mean, I come across definitely as an optimistic person, like I said, but I also said I scream into a pillow sometimes, like, I can't take it.
Yeah.
But it's growth as a human. It's growth as a person. I've been able to learn from so many great people, and Steve's one of them. There's tons of folks, unfortunately, have lost a couple just amazing people that were leaders in fisheries in recent years that I met early on as a 20-something that didn't fit.
Yeah.
And I've had all these folks that are truly have wisdom to share. And I think as a community, that's what we all learn from. There's plenty of folks in the recreational fishing community that you'll talk with. But I think talk to Steve and learn about what he believes about the systems up here and what's affecting them.
Yeah.
He's a governor-appointed chairman to our Tidal Fisheries Advisory Commission. So next week they'll meet. I think next week they'll meet. I'm the vice chairman of the Sport Fisheries Advisory Commission.
Yeah.
Steve is the one leader from the Tidal Fish Commission, the commercial side of things, that is appointed to also serve on our Sport Fish Commission. So I get that quarterly now meeting with him. And we're always talking about policy stuff, and we're one phone call away from clearing up a complete misconception, and that's what I appreciate out of my friendship with him. And
that's all. I hope he accepts. I'm looking forward to it because it seems like he kind of sits on the other side of the table for me, maybe.
Yeah.
And I'm totally open for.
Do you like to eat crabs?
Yes.
See, he's on the same side of the table. In fact, he'll put the crabs on the table for you to eat. I mean, you got to pay him.
And a lot of times, a lot of people on the other side of the table, because they don't understand each other, they don't understand what the other person's cause is.
That the table probably doesn't even belong.
Exactly.
Yeah. Plus, I mean, there's some amazing resources out here to utilize. The key is we do it all with science as much as possible. Never discount anecdotal experience.
Yeah.
And I tell people, don't ever feel intimidated by the science, because just make sure you strive to convey your message in a clear way.
Yeah.
Respecting the science, respecting the other opinion. That's how you be most effective. And that's how people will actually listen. And again, I fail at that all the time. I'm constantly trying to learn and practice what I do preach. So in the end, it's all about coming together and understanding each other. I will fight with people in a heartbeat if I have to. I said I like to work on things, but just like anybody, I can get angry. I can get frustrated. Not a lot of good gets done doing that.
Yeah.
But
it's a fight we all have.
Yeah, but Steve will be a good one, and he also catches fantastic crabs and knows the nooks and crannies of up here.
Probably have run into him because I buy crabs at Havre de Grace. If he sells them at Havre de Grace, I've probably talked to him.
Yeah, and I can't remember all the details. I'm unfortunately allergic to crabs.
Oh man,
it's terrible.
That's kind of ironic now, isn't it?
Native Marylander. Yeah. I jokingly have people call sometimes and say, "What's CCA's position on crab stuff?" I go, "I don't know. I'm allergic. They're a bug.
Yeah,
leave me alone." Truth is, I love them. I used to eat them a lot.
Yeah.
But anyway.
So, all right, buddy. Well, I appreciate you coming up here, driving all the way up here. I know it's a haul, and that's one text message I hate sending is my address. People go like, No,
it's all good.
Yeah, I really appreciate it, man. It was a pleasure meeting you.
My pleasure. Pleasure meeting you. And hey, join CCA, everyone, and get engaged no matter what your position is on things.
Yep. Awesome, man. Thank you.